Ben from Tensens. I'm going to talk about the Sapphire 370 made by Legend Brands. So let's get stuck into the specifications and what's inside the machine. I'm going to talk about the things I really like about it, some of the things I don't like about it, and why I would choose maybe a 370 over a Legend or a Legend over a 370. They're both very, very similar in their way they're made or the componentry inside. There's a few slight tweaks that are slightly different, but we'll get into that shortly. So what's in the 370? So it runs the upgraded 23 horsepower Kohler engine on it now. The Kohler engine has a oil cooler to help it, so your oil's not getting, because they're a water-cooled engine, sorry, an air-cooled engine, not water-cooled, air-cooled engine, your oil's not getting cooled any other way. So they've added the oil cooler to help to cool the oil down. That gives longevity to the engine. The 370 also runs the interpump, we call them interpump in Australia. They're a general pump in the USA. High temperature Teflon seals. So same as on the Legend, around 4,000 hours before we're doing seals and about 2,000 hours on the valves. So servicing and repair on the pump is really next to nothing. The only thing you have to make sure is you keep that belt nice and adjusted. They've done a few modifications to this machine to make it a lot better than it previously was. Which includes the water well, the thermal valve, and the pressure regulator. The pressure regulator now, as you can see, has been put on a tilt, on an angle, so it's easier to access to servicing. You do need to service this component so you can get access to it, and it's also got a bleed valve inside here to help bleed the tank of any air in there. On the 370, they run a water well. This makes extreme amounts of heat. The downside of the heat is obviously you need to get rid of it, and also it can cause a lot of calcification of parts that have constantly got water running over it. And if you come around the back here, Marsh, previous models and other brands used to run a cat, same even the Legend does too, runs a cat valve in here. Legend brands have upgraded this and now manufacturing their own high temperature valve, and you'll see here now it's got two hoses. One continues onto your waste tank, so the way it works, when the temperature gets too hot inside your water well, and I'll explain how a water well works in a sec, the water gets sucked out by your vacuum, but it's also got a second hose here which is connected to the top of the tank. What used to happen with these tanks is, especially on the 570, because water expands and contracts, you'd actually get an air pocket stuck inside the tank. So to get rid of that air pocket, every time this opens up, it also sucks the air out of the tank, which helps it fill up fast, and that's controlled by that pressure regulator on the front. So as you can see now, the water is consistently staying in here. As you can imagine, if you have half full of water and inside here it's consistently getting hot, it's going to get hot really, really quick. That's great for when you want hot water, but it's not real great when you've got componentry opening and close. This is set to about 50 or 60 degrees Celsius, probably 65 degrees, I'm not quite sure. And that water gets hot really, really quick. It's going to open and close constantly, and it's going to wear this valve out. We don't want that to happen. So with a larger holding tank in here, I'm filling it right to the top. That water takes a little bit longer to get hotter, but you also have hotter water, or more water, to go through your truck mount for things like tile cleaning and things. The back of the machine runs the 406 blower, the same blower that's on the Peak 500. The Peak just spins it faster. These produce about 317 CFM. On the Peak it does 406 or 405. I hear everyone saying, well, why can't we make this one do 405? It's just, your engine just doesn't have the horsepower. So an engine creates horsepower at its maximum RPM. So this particular engine, I think it might be 3.3 or 3.6 is traditional, where they make the maximum horsepower, maximum torque. But this is only running at 2.9 or 3,000 RPM. So you're not going to get the full 23 horsepower out of this engine. So you can't make the engine work harder than it's capable. So they detune it by running different size pulleys on it. So it's different pulley on this than it is on the Peak 500. And don't forget, you've also got to run your pressure pump. These pressure pumps normally on a pressure blaster will run a 5 or 6.5 horsepower engine to drive this pressure pump to do the 2,500 PSI. So this pressure pump, as I said, it's a 2,000 PSI pressure pump, but we're only spinning it, we're spinning it at 1,400 RPM or 1,466. And we're not using all the power of it because once again we can't take too much out of the engine. So usability is 1500 psi. You're going to get about 8 or 9 litres a minute of water flow out of it. So you get quite good hot water. So on the 370, what makes it different to the Legend? It's got adjustability. So the Legend doesn't have any adjustable temperature valves, but the 370 does. It uses a BIMI valve or an air valve on the front. This needs to be serviced more regularly. So there is a few more bells and whistles inside a 370 over a Legend, and that would be the difference between why I choose the two. If you're mechanically minded or you're very close to a service centre and you can have someone like us service it for you, all day get the 370 because you get a bit more adjustability, you get more temperature, a little bit more temperature. Believe it or not, the Legend actually makes more airflow, but this does allow you a bit more adjustability. It does have all the same things on the front here as the other machine. So chemical injection, your pressure gauge, your vacuum gauge, your clutch with an override. I've explained what the overrides are before, so it helps prime your pump and also identify any problems with your waste tank. Pump out pump, I'm breathing very heavily here, I don't need to. Throttle and choke, exactly the same as on the other machines. Key, all your fuses up here on the front, your temperature control, your metering valve and your chemical switch, along with your hour meter and your temperature. So your temperature is measured as it's coming out the machine, not at the heat exchange. What's on the front down here? Chemical check valves, pressure out, water in, pressure adjuster, bypass valve if it's still making too much hot water, you want to get some out, or you're bleeding it off at the end of the day, and your lube port. So as you can see, the concept of a 370 and the way it's designed. Legend brands both companies now, and they've redesigned the Legend and they've redesigned the Peak and they've redesigned the Everest. And they've kept the Prochem DNA and they've kept the 370, the 570, the Sapphire DNA. Nice compact footprint, make it go in a nice small van. The downside of that is, and I do a fair bit of work myself, it is harder to work on. As you can see, the spaces in here to get in and out of it a little bit harder. So that would be the downside of the 370 that I think. My personal view is the belts the belts are a shorter belt, so you do need to make sure your belts are adjusted regularly. They will burn up belts if you do not adjust your belt, but they do have quite an easy adjustable mechanism with bolts. Yeah, we just use a level to level ours out, so we're making sure the belts are pulled nice and tight. So pretty easy to adjust. It is hard to replace, so my recommendation is keep on top of your belts, maintain your machine. This is your livelihood, so you need to maintain your equipment. If you just don't care about it and go, well, I'll get to 200 hours and replace, or get the guys to service it, well, there's a fair bit of damage done in that 200 hours if you haven't adjusted your belts or changed your oil. So it's very, very important to keep on top of your service. I said before, I'll talk about the water well, the way it works. Inside here is a round tube. It's like on the Legend over here, if you can see it. So this round tube is on the inside of this square box. And so if you can imagine that square box has a round tube, the water are on the outside, you can see it here. The water gets preheated. Water comes in, probably a pressure regulator, preheated. This is your preheater. And then it goes into your heat exchange, and you can see here your air from your blower comes in here, as well as your exhaust gases as well, inside the coil. And the coils are actually got copper welded around the outside of the stainless steel. And that catches the heat, transfers it into the copper, which then transfers it into your water. So a really, really smart way of doing it. And that's exactly the same that's in the Legend and the Peak and the Everest. So the adjustability comes from the BIMI valve, which inside basically just opens and closes the disc. As the temperature gets to the set temperature, it closes it up, opens it up, lets the air bypass past, so the heat exchange doesn't get any more heat. As it cools off, as you're using it, it closes it back up and reheats it. So a pretty simple little system. So, but yeah, great machine for tile cleaning, great because it's got the tri-flow blower, it's quite good for restoration and commercial work as well. So good little machine, but as I said, if you're a single operator and you want that adjustability, 370 all day, and you're near a service centre. If you're someone that's out in the bush and you don't really need to know too much about it, I'd go towards the Legend. But both machines, fantastic. So I'm Ben from Tensens, and this was the Sapphire 370.